Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's first in the series of This Can Happen Insights. I am Zoe Sinclair, co-founder of This Can Happen, and I'm delighted to welcome today Nancy Lengthorn from WPP to our first in conversation with, where we hope to get lots of insights into what's going on and how people like Nancy are liaising with all their staff and engaging with people at this time. So the aim is that I'm going to have a conversation with Nancy for about 15 to 20 minutes, and we really do encourage you to send in any questions. On your control panel, that's probably on the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a question box. Feel free to send in that question using that question box at any time during the session, and I will come to it. It's completely anonymous. No one can see that you've asked a question, and I won't call out anybody's names when it comes to the questions unless you specifically want to say who you are and what company you work with. So if you want to test out the question box, please do so, and I will see all the hellos coming in. But in the meantime, Nancy, welcome. Thank you very, very much for joining us today. So just briefly, just tell me kind of what you do at WPP.
Okay, so I am Head of Inclusion and Belonging at WPP. So that means that I am working across all of the different agencies that are under the WPP umbrella to work out how we can be more inclusive, what stuff is brilliant that's going on across the network, how can we amplify that, how can we share the learnings and just make sure that people come and work at WPP and really feel like they belong here. Currently, I'm homeschooling 4 children and we have a new puppy. So when you see me looking frantically over there, it's because I'm worried that they're all about to come in here. So at the moment, my role is quite challenging. But yeah. Hopefully.
Totally and utterly understand, and we appreciate your time. So we're going to dive straight in. And you, you spoke at our conference last year. Are very, you've had a really great mental health allies program, and just I'd be really keen to understand. And lots of people have actually sent in questions in advance about this. You know, what did you do from day one? This remote new way of being an ally. What role have the allies played for you, and how?
A really important one, actually, and I think what's really important is that straight away other people from around the business came to me and said, we need the allies, how can we use the allies? And I think that speaks to sort of how important they've become as part of the MediaCom culture. So we have allies across a couple of the different WPP opcos, but they've been at MediaCom for the sort of longest period of time. And immediately it just felt like everyone was thinking that they're really important people right now. So that's a really positive sign for me and shows that I think they've had impact. And so the MediaCom London Chief Talent Officer, Elaine Bremner, sort of very quickly said, how can we take that group and help them to sort of keep everybody stable and make sure that we're hearing the mood of people at home and so we know how to sort of react and how to support people. So the thing that we did straight away was to put them on twice weekly calls so the whole company can dial in, and a couple of allies host each session and people will just dial in and can speak up whatever they want. And some of those calls, you know, sometimes there've been quite a lot of people on those calls. So I think the first one we did, I'm sure about 80 people dialed in, which out of around sort of 1,500 people, I think it's quite a lot. There aren't as many people on those calls now as the weeks have sort of gone on, and people have probably adjusted a little bit. Their numbers are smaller, but we keep them in place because it doesn't really matter to me whether one person dials in or 500 do, really. It's about making sure that somebody has that place to go if they are feeling like they can't cope that day, and who can they speak to, what's that sort of signpost that's constantly there where they know they can go and get some help. So that will continue, and it's just a really nice forum for people to chat and ask questions, share resources, talk about things that have worked for them. where they might be having difficulties, what things they've read that are brilliant. It's just a really good way of unearthing a lot of that stuff.
And has that been an anonymous forum, or you can see everybody's names and everybody talks freely?
Yeah, it's not anonymous. So people are dialing in and their photos are up and their names are up, and people are just chatting. I mean, what I find interesting is quite often the majority of the people on the call don't talk, and that's probably, it's quite difficult if you're the one running the session, because then you've got to sort of generate that content and you've got to keep things moving. But I really respect that, actually. I think it's really nice. Sometimes people just want to sit and listen and they don't want to talk, and that's absolutely fine. Sometimes we get people following up afterwards, and they'll send an email and say, you said a thing, or you talked about a website, please could you share that with me? And that's okay if they don't want to do that on that call.
Yes, so I was about to say, have the allies been doing anything on a one-to-one basis? Have they been available like they would be if they were in an office for people to approach them?
Yeah, they have, and we've done everything exactly as we would. We've just made it clear how people can access them remotely. So we're constantly signposting to the allies. We have reinforced who they are, how they can be contacted. So the service is still there as it ordinarily is. I think what's interesting is, having spoken to quite a few of the allies, they're not necessarily getting more people coming to them for a sort of one-on-one interaction, but what they are doing is experiencing more of these conversations coming up in normal work situations. And I think that's really interesting, because people maybe still feel like, oh, I don't want to. I think at the moment it feels like there's a bit of a competition about who's in the worst situation. And I think there are a lot of people being very stoic and thinking, I'm not in the worst situation, I shouldn't really complain about things. And I think maybe that makes people sort of less inclined to go and ask for some help. But this stuff is coming up in normal work conversations, and so I think that's great that the allies can sort of almost unofficially be sort of doing this stuff as well as officially.
And I can see quite a few questions coming in, and I was going to ask you this anyway. How did you train your allies? Because you chose something quite specific for yours, which I know you have said to me. You look back now, especially for these times, and think, I'm really pleased we did it that way.
Yeah, we got lucky, I guess, really, because at the time we didn't really sort of know a great deal about this, and I'm glad that we took the path that we did, because it was a very thorough one. So we chose to get training from Mental Health at Work, who are a brilliant organisation with a couple of amazing people that we specifically dealt with then. And part of the training there is not just about learning about mental health and, you know, the conditions and how things manifest and the language that you should and shouldn't use. It's also about being trained how to listen and how to ask open-ended questions, which just sounds like such a simple thing. And it was honestly the thing that people found most challenging in that training. And I remember literally getting very hot, because you do it in a group environment. It feels quite, you suddenly realise that you can't do it. You suddenly, you know, we will spend years saying, oh, I'm a great listener. None of us are at all. And having to be trained in that in a group environment, it suddenly became quite stressful. You suddenly realise, I've really got to get good at this, because this is not an innate skill. And I think that has been an amazing part of the allies training. And currently, I think it's probably even more useful. So part of that training around sort of active listening and asking open-ended questions is to sit in the silence and not to fill every gap, which is something that I'm naturally terrible at. So I always think if I'm not talking, then I'm not being helpful. And the training helps people to understand that actually it's those silences where interesting or important things will be said. And so actually just sit back, let that sort of discomfort sort of float over you, really, and that person will keep talking, and they'll start to open up even more to you. And I think in the context of conducting everything at the moment, either on the phone or on a screen, that is really useful. They're really useful skills now, because again, we're suddenly communicating in a new way. We want to fill the silences, we want to fix everything, but actually let's just slow everything down, sit back a little bit and see if that person opens up a little bit more or in a different way. So that training has always been helpful, but I feel like at the moment, in this new way of communicating, it's really vital.
So really, really interesting. So overall then, from what you're hearing, and not just from allies, from the line managers, and I'm sure it's a joined up approach, are you seeing more levels of anxiety? Are you seeing people opening up more than they have done before?
It's a mixed bag, I think. We're not, the allies aren't seeing an increase in people coming to them asking for help. I worry about that a little bit. I do think people are being really stoic at the moment, and I think that people are thinking there are people in worse situations, therefore I shouldn't moan. And I think that's dangerous. Like we're all allowed to find the situation that we're in difficult. Anecdotally, I've spoken to lots of people who I know are really struggling with their anxiety at the moment, but they're just feeling like I've got to hold that in because other people have got, other people are grieving, other people are ill, so therefore I mustn't talk about this. And I think that is something that we really try to sort of talk about and be open about, because it's okay if you're just feeling sad that you haven't seen your friends like that, or it's okay if you're feeling anxious because you've lost your routine. Just because there are worse situations out there doesn't mean that we can't talk about that. So a lot of our senior leaders, when there are town halls and things like that, are talking about those sort of slightly smaller things and being very open and vulnerable about their own experiences and how they're finding things. But I think that there is a slight reticence at the moment to come forward and ask for help, because I think some people feel like it's self-indulgent, which I think it shouldn't. And that's why we just keep reinforcing our own vulnerability, the resources that we have. We keep signposting people to things, and we've been doing a lot of sharing of articles and things so that people can read for themselves, get the language that they need to be able to sort of help themselves a little bit. What I would say, one positive I think, is that people are having more of these conversations. So people are asking these questions far more frequently. And people who historically haven't been great at talking about mental health, I'm finding that they really are at the moment. So lots of our meetings are starting with people talking about how their team are doing, people they're worried about, and I think that's the thing that we should be pleased about, because I think that will normalise this for the future.
Absolutely. Okay, so one question, and I can see how fast time is going, and lots of people are sending in questions. Yeah, we've talked about the role of the allies. Is this whole situation that we find ourselves actually, it goes beyond just the allies? Yes, they're playing a big role here, but surely we can't put the onus just on them. It's like their time has come now to be there, but surely that's a big job for the allies who all have their day jobs.
Yeah. They all have their day jobs and they all have the same experiences that we're all struggling with as well. So there have been a couple of points where I have sort of intervened and said, actually, we can't ask the allies to do that, because we need to make sure that they are okay at the moment and that they're not overburdened. So much of this comes down to leadership, doesn't it? Like this has to be on everybody to talk about. And as I say, I think that so many of our meetings are starting with these sort of conversations. So the allies are central, but this is, for the first time, I feel a little bit like everyone can now see that this is everybody's responsibility. And what we've really tried to do with in quite a few of our senior meetings is to encourage people to really start to understand every single person in their team setup at the moment. So I think initially there was a bit of a rush. I don't mean at our company, just societally. I think there was a bit of a rush to go, oh my God, what about working parents? This is going to be horrendous. And as I said, I've got 4 people who are hovering and annoying me at the moment. So I know how horrendous it is. And I know that that's really challenging, but I'm not sure that that's the thing that we should be most worried about. I think that there are people who are living on their own. There are people who are living in not particularly happy sort of situations. There are people who are living in flat shares where they don't really know the people that they're living with very well. And so we really tried to get our senior leaders to not just concentrate on working parents, but to reach out to those people who are in slightly more difficult situations, because I feel like they're less inclined to put their hand up and to say, I need help, because in some of those scenarios, there's the risk of some shame sort of coming up, and people therefore don't want to talk. So picking the phone up to a manager and saying, I'm really lonely at the moment, is an incredibly difficult thing for people to do. Me to moan about my children driving me insane and having to print out thousands of sheets of paper from the school, really easy to do. So I think we have to just, we've tried to make sure that our managers and leaders are reaching out to everybody, not just, you know, if someone's not telling you stuff, that's the person probably to follow up with. And so we've tried to be bespoke. Who's caring for somebody, who lives on their own, who lives in a slightly difficult setup, pick up the phone and actually ask them about that. Don't wait for them to say it. Reference the fact that you know that that's their living situation. How is it for you? Are things difficult? What can we do to support? And I feel like everyone is starting to take ownership and responsibility for that, rather than just hoping that either the people team or the allies will do that.
Great. Okay, and I think you make a very valid point. I think there was a very big knee-jerk reaction to working parents, and it is an issue for many parents, and you know, single parents, you know, especially that combined with, as you said, living alone with a child. That's a big responsibility as well for line managers. Really must have called into question how well they know their teams as well. So that must have been quite a wake-up situation for them, I can imagine.
Yeah, I have no doubt, and I think if for people who've got big teams, I think we're all guilty of sometimes just talking to a couple of the most senior people in your team. And here we've had to try and get people to go down the layers and to really let's start learning about everybody. And that's a big ask. Again, when we're all sort of struggling and have all got our own stuff going on at the moment. So I think that's been difficult, but I think it's the right thing to do. And I think that culturally there are huge benefits there for the future. I mean, that from an inclusion point of view, that's really important that somebody senior in your team would reference something about your life to show that they knew about your setup, and were willing to talk about that to support you if you needed it. So without wanting to be really cynical and suggest that you would use this situation, it's a massive positive for helping to bring people together a bit more, and we really need that now when everything's so sort of disparate. I think that's a really good way of helping to create that team cohesion, and make sure that people are sort of sticking together.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of really interesting questions coming in. So I'm just going to start working my way through them. One of them is, how have your staff reacted to people, I suppose, checking up on them? Is that welcomed, or have you had any sort of pushback on that? You know, why are you calling me? I'm fine. You know, I think that's actually a really interesting. I'd like to hear your point of view on that.
Yeah, I haven't heard of any negative feedback in that area, actually. So I'm hoping that means that there isn't. I think it depends how you do things. I think if you make people feel like I'm monitoring this on the spreadsheet and I you know, I'm collecting data on this, then obviously that could be seen as something that's that would make somebody feel vulnerable and quite exposed. I think if this is done in a way where people are just reaching out and being authentic and saying, I'm struggling, here's the reason I'm struggling, how, you know, tell me about you. I think if you can do it in that way where it feels like a sincere and sort of heartfelt conversation with some vulnerability in there, I think that people, even if they don't want to disclose, and I'm sure many people haven't, I'm sure many people have said, I'm absolutely fine, there's nothing to see here, at least they are left with the feeling that somebody has noticed, somebody has asked, and if I need to, then I might be able to reach out to that person. So we're certainly not sort of pushing people into disclosing things, but we are giving them an opportunity to talk about that if they want to. And I think that's really important role modelling there.
Really important. So it's interesting, somebody has said, and I don't know if this applies to you, about, you know, there's lots of online tools, Headspace and all of those things that a lot of companies are beginning to use. But somebody has asked, you know, do you think that actually at this time people are valuing face-to-face communication, that they're valuing that the most, more than being told sort of go and look after yourself, here's an app that can help you, that interaction is more useful at this time?
Yeah, I think everybody's different. I think some people will absolutely want everything to be done face to face, and I think some people don't, and find particularly this way of communicating where everything's on a video call. I think that can be quite exposing to some people. Even if you're a really great communicator, it's just an odd way to do things. So I think it's really important to offer the breadth, so that people understand that there are multiple options, really. So a couple of our opcos have access, for example, to Unmind. Mediacom are launching that imminently. I think it's important to have those things where people can go off and read and research in their own time, in a sort of safe space where they're not feeling exposed. I think there's a really important place for that. And then I think you have that human connection with managers and with allies. I just don't think people should go for one approach. I think all of those things should be out there, really. Not many of us do anything in one way. We might want to talk about something and then research it afterwards and read up on something. So as long as people understand there are multiple touch points here and you can interact with whichever one is most helpful for you, then I think that's the best place to be.
Great. Yes, I think that's really valid. Somebody's just asked, sort of going back to these, I think you call them town halls, or the meetings that you're having every week. So somebody's just said, can you explain how the forums work for people to dial in? Do you use Zoom? And who plays the host role? I think you mentioned it was an ally, but forgive me if, and you know, you said 80 or so people turned up. Out of how many staff they're asking. I think somebody probably looking to do something themselves and just wondering how the setup works.
Okay, so our town halls are slightly different things. The town halls I referenced just because a lot of our senior leaders are being open about their own sort of living situation at the moment, which I think is amazing. They're really big affairs. They are more about giving information to the company. The thing that the allies are running, that's like a mental health check-in. And so that is a quieter, smaller, two-way conversation setup. They tend to be run by 2 or 3 allies. Those allies will largely do a little bit of preparation. So things are quite free-flowing, but they'll do a bit of preparation. There might be a bit of a theme one week. Or it might be that they choose to share different things that they've tried during that week that have been helpful or not helpful for them. So they'll come up with a bit of a theme. Those allies run the session. Whoever, the whole company is invited, and whoever wants to dial in, dials in. Mediacom are the agency that are running those. So that's open to about 1,500 people. And I think about 80 to 100 is the highest number that we've had. As I say, as the weeks have gone on, that has reduced a little. I think as people have just adjusted to the situation that they're in. But there's no sort of set agenda. That is simply about people dialing in and chatting. And sometimes people have phoned up with really specific questions, and other times there's just been a couple of people who have talked about how they're coping, and people have listened into that. So it's really, really flexible. We're trying to keep that very sort of fluid so that people can get what they want from that session.
Okay, really helpful.
We've also had a couple of mindfulness sessions each week as well. Lots of the agencies within WPP are doing different things. So wellbeing, mindfulness sessions, and again, they're things that everyone's invited to, and you just dial in if you find that that's useful on that day.
Okay, great. Okay, so here's an interesting question as well. The eventual return to office working, whenever that may be, is becoming quite a daunting prospect for many of our employees. Even those who found isolation difficult are now settling into a less socially interactive lifestyle. What initiatives are you thinking of putting into place to support people to eventually make that transition back to the office?
That's such a good question. I wish I could answer it. So there's loads of work going on at the moment. Literally, there's a big meeting happening currently to start fleshing those plans out. I think the reality is, even when we do go back to work, and obviously no one can really answer this yet, but the reality is that we won't be seeing whole companies returning, that we will not be going back to work like we were a few months ago. Things will be very different, and it's likely that we'll have things like staggered days, A, B, C teams. So the office is going to be a great deal quieter than it ever was. We haven't yet got to the stage where we know what the initiatives look like to help with the sort of culture and mental health piece. The work that's being done at the moment is more about the safety. But we've been having some conversations this morning from an inclusion point of view as to how we make that easier for certain groups. So, for example, one of the areas that we flagged is that people who are suffering with poor mental health are possibly going to find this much harder. People with, everyone's talking about going back to work in masks and having hand sanitizer everywhere. For people who have OCD, that is an incredibly stressful new world to be talking about. And so we've been talking a little bit this morning about how we need to address this and be very clear about the different groups of people who may be struggling. What I wouldn't want to happen is that we just have one generic plan and just assume that everybody can get on with that. I think we need to call out certain groups of people to say, by the way, if you're worried about this, that's absolutely fine, and we can talk to you about more flexible ways of working. I don't think we should ever be saying to anybody, here's the day we start again, everyone in. That's just not going to work. So there'll be people with mobility issues, there'll be people with mental health issues. There will be social mobility factors here that we need to bear in mind. People who live a long way away, have multiple bus rides to get to work, are not going to be able to do that in the climate of social distancing on public transport. So I don't know what the silver bullet is, but I think the approach has to be a bespoke one where we talk about the challenges that different people are going to have and are very open about what those challenges are, to encourage conversation about it so that we can then speak to individuals about their situation. I think a really generic approach is going to be very difficult for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's very honest of you. I've got one last question for you. We've talked a lot about the allies. Has this been replicated around the world, or is this very much UK focused?
So at the moment, it's pretty much UK focused. We have spoken to a number of different markets about it and have shared learnings with a number of different markets. Even this week, I think today, one of my colleagues is going to be talking to some of our MediaCom colleagues in another market about it. So I think it's difficult. There are some countries where you could adopt this pretty easily because they're culturally similar to the UK. There are other markets where mental health is not something that would be talked about in an accepted way sort of societally. So I think it's something that you have to, again, be bespoke about. There are definitely things that we can transfer to other countries, and culturally some of it would be difficult. So everyone's at a different stage, I think.
Yeah. Nancy, thank you so much for sharing these insights. I think you've given a lot of great ideas and honesty to all people that have been listening today. So thank you very much for joining us for our first This Can Happen Insights. Really appreciate it. And thank you very much to everyone who's on the call today. We hope you will join us for further insights. Next one is taking place on the 18th. with Johnny Benjamin, and newly announced Dame Kelly Holmes will be joining Johnny, and I will be interviewing them both. So I look forward to seeing you all then. Nancy, thank you so much again, and I'm now going to end this Can Happen Insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe.